appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I'd like to call my fellow board members to their seats, please. I have 5:30 for this scheduled committee of the whole meeting. We do have a quorum present, so I'd like to begin. All right, the first matter on the agenda is a presentation from Bob Hammonds regarding use of public funds to inform the public about an election. Mr. Hammonds?
And before each of you, you should see a packet of documents. I've actually placed my information in writing for you so that you can review it at your convenience. It's a pretty simple rule. Public dollars cannot be expended to promote or urge the passage or the defeat of any particular tax proposition. I've attached also a number of Attorney General opinions interpreting both the constitutional provision and the statutory provision, which are the same. I'd also point out that the statutory provision does have a criminal sanction attached to it if you knowingly violate it. So both in our Louisiana Constitution and our Louisiana state law, there are prohibitions against the utilization of public funds to urge. That's not to educate. You certainly can use public dollars to educate your voters on the tax propositions, what's going to be on the ballot, how much money would be generated, how you intend to spend it, what your needs are. But what you cannot do is to use those dollars for any purpose that would be urging passage of. As subtle as it is, there's a distinction between urging your citizens to vote and urging your citizens to vote yes. You can do the former, but you cannot do the latter. There are some other more sophisticated aspects of this, utilization of cell phones and equipment, and all those are addressed in the Attorney General's opinions, which are included in the packet. We don't have a lot of problems with those situations, but there are some subtle rulings. There's also a distinction between hiring a public relations firm and hiring a public information firm. Again, as subtle as that distinction might sound, one of them smacks of advocacy, one of them smacks of education. And again, you can do the information and the education, you just cannot do the advocacy. So in a nutshell, Madam President, those are the rules. Now we can go into as much more detail about them as you see fit. But again, the Attorney General opinions referencing those constitutional and statutory provisions are attached for your convenience, should you desire more information.
And Mr. Hammonds, is there a distinction between, for instance, an elected board member acting officially versus acting in their personal capacity?
Well, it's not necessarily the acting. You as a public official, certainly as a school board member, would have the right to go out and advocate for the passage of a tax. The prohibition is against the utilization of public funds to do that. So again, that is the distinction that needs to be made. I would think it would be somewhat ridiculous for elected members of this board who supported the calling of the tax in the first place not to want to go out and support it in the community. And you certainly have the ability to do so long as you don't use public funds or public property to do so. Another example that I have run across here recently would be, I had a school that had one of the big electronic signs out front, and of course the big electronic sign says tax election this weekend, please vote yes. That would be prohibited. So the utilization of public property or public equipment is the same as the utilization of public funds. It would be prohibited.
Given that this is a committee of the whole, it's a little less formal than our regular meeting, so I'd encourage anyone who is here in the audience who has questions or comments to come on up to the podium, and also any of the board members, and I'll recognize Mr. Centani.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Hammonds, several of us have monthly meetings or periodic meetings in our districts. I know Mr. Broussard does at the at the Clifton Chenier Center. I tend to use the school cafeterias at the schools in my district. I heard you mention use of public property in encouraging a yes vote or advocating for a proposition. Having a meeting where public funds are not expended but are held on public property, would that present a violation in your opinion?
I think that it could, because there's some value to the utilization of the public property. And that would be a value that would be paid for with public funds, because that's how the facility was built in the first place. So I do think that that could be a potential issue. If you had your meetings outside at a church or at a civic hall or some other location, I don't think that there would be any prohibition involved. But again, once you start using public property, I think you run the risk. And one of the things I always tell my boards is that you want to be squeaky clean when it comes to these elections, because people who oppose your call for a tax are going to use whatever method they have to discredit that call and this board. And if they can find anything that is not squeaky clean to complain about, they will take advantage of that. And unfortunately, even the allegation of a violation can sometimes be enough to cost you the votes necessary to pass a proposition. So again, if there's any doubt at all, I would encourage the board to go over and above, take that extra step to make sure that everything is done perfectly legally, so that you can't be criticized for that, and so that it cannot interfere with the possible passage of your proposition.
Mr. Lashley?
Two questions, please, Mr. Hammonds. One, if you're attending a school function, such as a parent PTO meeting or so forth and so on, a meeting at the school, and if you're asked about it, the proposition, is it okay to discuss it then, or is it still?
Well, I think about that quote, from the United States Constitution, when they said a child does not lose his or her constitutional rights when they enter the doorway of a school. Well, the same thing would be true of a board member entering a meeting. You don't lose your constitutional right to free speech. So you would have a right to free speech. Now, if you step to the microphone of a meeting at a public school, and you said, as a member of the board, we really need this tax, so I'm urging everybody to go out there and vote yes, that's what I think could lead you into some difficulty.
But if you're questioned during one of these meetings, you can go ahead and answer your constituents' questions.
You still have a right to First Amendment free speech.
Second part of the question is, everything you see on the internet is true, so what about social media and Facebook, Twitter?
As far as
promoting, or
as long as there are no public funds involved, okay, then you're good to go. That's when you get into to run across the prohibition, is if you're utilizing public funds to support either a candidate or a proposition, or to oppose a candidate or a proposition, for that matter.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Mr. Hammonds, a little more clarification. You mentioned the use of public facilities. Mr. Centani mentioned in his comments the Clifton Chenier Center, which is a public place. However, it doesn't belong to the school system. I can give you an example of a public library where they allow you to come in and utilize their space for different reasons upon approval.
Right.
Would those places be would you be prohibited in those places as well, or you're just speaking to school system, school board owned property?
I would say that I'm talking about school board owned property. I'm talking about funds that are within the care, custody, and control of the school board.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Or any members of the public? All right, we'll move on to the next part of our agenda, which is a presentation of scenarios and related sample resolutions for consideration of a call for election for sales tax or bond property tax. Dr. Aguilar?
Yes, ma'am. You're going to get Mr. Guidry and I tag teaming this evening, so we'll start with Mr. Guidry looking at some of the proposition language.
back at our November 9th meeting, we had presented to the board 6 scenarios. There were 3 sales tax scenarios and 3 property tax scenarios. Basically, for comparative purposes, to facilitate the board's decision if it should call for an election, what type of proposition to place on the ballot, either a sales tax or a bond and property tax. So with that said, we basically went back to scenarios 3 and 6, which were the 2 that were discussed the most. So that for sales tax, in this scenario here, scenario 1, you're looking at a 1/2 cent sales tax, 5% interest, 25-year bonds, 1% growth factor in the collections would generate roughly about $410 million of bond proceeds. As compared to a property tax, and in this case, we're looking at 5% interest in the 30-year bonds, 1% growth factor, right at $623 million of proceeds. So basically, there's a difference of 5 years in the length of the bonds, but ultimately, when you're comparing sales tax revenue bonds to property tax, to general obligation bonds that are debt serviced using property taxes, typically your sales tax revenue bonds carry a higher interest rate, and typically, although we're legally limited to 75% of our sales tax collections, our debt service cannot exceed more than 75%. Historically, we've used 50 here in the school district for obvious reasons. Sales tax collections take a significant drop, and it could put the board in an unpleasant situation in terms of servicing the debt. So ultimately, when you're comparing the two, you're, I guess to simplify, you're looking at about $23 million annually from a sales tax, 1/2 cent tax, because we would be limited in 2 of our municipalities, Youngsville and Broussard. We'd be I'm sorry, we wouldn't be limited. That would be if we had a 1% tax. So we're good there. But we're looking at about $23 million of sales tax collections versus about $26 million in property taxes if we were to go with the 12.5 mils millage rate for servicing of debt for general obligation bonds. So with that said, basically what we're looking for is a direction from the board with regards to the call for election that the board will be considering at its January 11th meeting, whether or not we should go, whether you're interested in going with a general obligation bond / property tax initiative or a sales tax initiative. And what that will allow us to do is go through select the proper resolution and have everything prepared so that when we present it for the January 11th meeting, we could have that available so that the board could just be voting on whether or not it wants to actually call the election. So with that said, I would ask that the board consider making a motion as to whether it wishes to see a property tax, to move forward with the property tax initiative or a sales tax initiative when considering its call for election at its January 11th meeting.
Mr. Guidry, isn't there another property tax option that we can consider for a fixed millage rate? A limited tax? We can fix the rate basically at 15 mils every year.
Well, with regards to the way the proposition is worded, and this particular scenario that we're presenting, The assumption is that we would be collecting the 12.5 mills in year one forward. Obviously, it allows a greater number of bonds, greater value of bonds to be sold. And so we would do that by stipulating in the proposition the dollar value of bonds to be issued, and then the millage rate to be assessed in the first year. And it's my understanding, Mr. Osborne, you can correct me, but that millage rate in the first year, we either put in the millage rate for the first year, or we can put in the millage rate for the highest year that we anticipate first year. So it's our intentions, or the way, let's just say the assumptions for this particular scenario assumes the full 12.5 mills in year one.
Right, I guess I'm asking about a scenario you're not presenting at this point would be a scenario where we don't put the amount of money we anticipate on collecting over the life of the tax, essentially, but we're instead presenting the millage rate that'll be fixed for a period of time.
Mr. Gitcher, I believe like last year when we were discussing this, we isn't this the limited tax bond where we're asking to collect a millage, and it says reasonably is expected to collect the X amount of money in the first year. Like, you know, let's say it's $22 million, and that's what would be on the proposition. And wasn't there a type of tax bond that was an option last year at this time?
We had considered a limited tax bond, I know, for the bonds that we were selling using internal funds. And basically, what that does is it puts you in a position of having to have 133% of the I'm sorry, maybe 1.35, 135% of the debt service actually being collected. So in essence, instead of having assessing the mills that you need to pay for your debt service, you're limited to having to collect 135% of what you need to service the debt. So you just need to consider, if we go that route, that in essence you'll end up issuing fewer bonds and generating lesser bond proceeds.
Lesser proceeds in the short term, but over the long term, can you run those scenarios for us at least?
You want to use the same the same millage rate?
Unless we decide at this meeting to go with a different one.
Let's say again, I'm sorry.
I said unless we decide to go with something different today.
Okay.
Can we make a motion? Can I make a motion? Bob was going to make a motion. Okay.
Mr.
So-
Lashley? Oh, sorry, Mr. Guidry.
Well, so at this point, again, if the board is interested in moving forward with the property tax, we could run both scenarios when they consider the call for election and present it at that time.
All right, I suspect that we have several people here who want to make comments before we get to that point, Mr. Guidry, where we make a motion.
Okay.
Either way. Mr. Lashley?
I've had discussions with some of my constituents, and I mean, I know we're going to have people who are leaning towards a sales tax. Can you give me the exact numbers of what each area in the parish is paying tax-wise, you know, Youngsville, Broussard, Scott, and parish as a whole? And I think some of the reasoning behind it is with a sales tax, not only is Lafayette Parish paying, but anyone and everyone from the outside areas that come and shop inside of our parish are basically contributing to helping build our schools. So just for informational purposes, do you have that information in front of you as far as, Youngsville, Broussard, Scott, Doosan, what their...
These rates do not include the TIF zones. That
Okay.
would have to be added over and above for the respective TIF zone areas. But for Broussard, you're looking at prior to any, in other words, the current rates, prior to any increase, you're looking at 4.5 cents local. You'd have to add 5 to that to get total state and local. Karen Crow is at 5%. Doosan's at 4, Scott's at 4, and Youngsville is at 5.5.
Mr. Guidry, the unincorporated areas of Lafayette Parish, at 4%? 4.
So currently, our sales tax rates parish-wide is between 9 cents and 11.5 cents without the additional sales tax, if that's the route we go.
Yes.
I want to be clear that you said earlier that there were no areas of the parish that would not pay if we chose to go to the sales tax route.
If we chose to go to sales tax route and a half cent sales
At a half cent.
half cent.
And that would be effective everywhere in the parish. Youngsville wouldn't have any
That-
trouble,
that-
even though they're at 10.5.
That's correct, but it would put both Youngsville and Broussard at the cap if another taxing entity were interested in, and that's an FYI.
And
We're
Karen Crow,
interested-
you said is now at 10 total?
Correct.
That doesn't present an
Plus,
issue.
plus the TIF in that area.
But they have a TIF where Gloria switch?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
John's restaurant, that corner.
Okay. So all of that from Prejean's up to Super One? That's a TIF? That's a,
Or you switch all the way to.
okay.
And then Scott has 2, and we have
It's
one.
Louisiana Avenue, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the south side, Ambassador and College Saloon, none of that is a TIF?
No, I think that was addressed in a different manner
Okay.
in terms of the funding for that infrastructure.
I'll go ahead and make a motion on this. I move that the board consider issuing general obligation bonds to support this proposition.
I have a, Mr. Santani, if you might consider that we vote first on the decision of a sales tax versus a property tax, and then we have another discussion on the type of property tax.
Mr. Guidry, general obligation bonds implies ad valorem taxes, yes?
Correct.
So,
There you go.
in general, okay.
Yes.
I'll second.
All right. All right, before we move any further, I'm asking for any members of the public who'd like to come up and state their preference or comments or questions about the current motion and the sales tax proposition versus a property tax proposition. All right, any further questions or comments from the board? Well, and Mr. Santani, can I ask for a clarification on your motion? Are you asking for the board to vote to eliminate the sales tax as an option?
I was responding to Mr. Guidry's request for some direction on this. I don't intend this to eliminate sales tax as an option if we choose to go a different route after discussing it further. But he asked for a motion for some direction.
All right, and for purposes of our meeting Wednesday, are you asking for more finite direction where the board chooses one or the other?
What it would do, if we had that direction this evening, it would allow us to complete the resolutions and things of that nature prior to the Wednesday board meeting.
Right,
So
so
the
by the
board-
end of this meeting, you would prefer that we have eliminated one option or the other through motion?
Yes, if
Okay.
possible.
Then I would say at this point, because this is a committee of the whole and we've got this on the agenda, we're already discussing and considering both of the options, and we do have other components to talk about as far as the resolution and the project priority list. So I think we're already considering, so I'm not sure that we need a motion to consider the ad valorem.
Well, then let's make the motion to eliminate sales tax as an option then, and have that discussion.
All right. That's
second.
your motion? Okay, all right. So the current motion on the floor is to eliminate the sales tax proposition as a possibility for moving forward. So I will ask again for members of the public for any comments or questions about the current motion to eliminate sales tax
May I ask
as a
question
possibility.
Before we,
Mr. Broussard?
has a study been done as far as, we don't want to go into this, we want to go into this in a positive way. We want the public to support us. Has any study been done as far as what would be acceptable to the public?
I do know that this has been an ongoing discussion for probably 5+ years now, and with each administration, we've basically recommitted to bringing the subject matter up and vetting it, if not in the community, at least with some of the community organizations. So initially, that began back when we were working on the facilities master plan in the 2008 time frame to 2010. That was in Mr. Superintendent Lemoyne's administrative time period. And when Dr. Cooper came on, we basically went back and updated some of the work that had been done with regards to property tax, sales tax. And beyond that, Dr. Aguilar, I don't know if you want to make any comments with regards to any of the work that's been done with community organizations up to this point.
So, members of the board, we've had very, very fruitful and productive meetings with LaPesque specifically and One Acadiana in general over the past several months. At no time did we exclude any option for revenue generation for the board to consider. To my knowledge, we have not commissioned a study specifically to try to gauge voter interest. The reality is that we're trying to find a mechanism to fund facility needs. If you go all the way back and start researching from 2008 through the culmination of a long-range facility plan conducted by CSRS that was delivered to the board in 2010, at that time, the district had a recognizable facility need of roughly $1.1 billion as measured by CSRS. This board went to the public with a tax proposition, and I think you know the history of the vote on that tax proposition. Since 2010, the school system has been trying to deal with the facility needs. The bulk of the work identified in 2010 has not disappeared. It hasn't corrected itself. This board, and other boards, in fact, have found the ability to fund about $172 million worth of facility needs over the past 6 years. In the meantime, this $1.1 billion identified need in 2010, if you factor in construction cost, the facility needs in today's dollars equals about $1.2 billion. So from the $1.2 billion, subtract $170 million of new construction and facility upgrades, we are still short roughly $1 billion worth of needs in the district. And so the decision, I suppose, for you to weigh heavily on is, do we go the sales tax route, which would generate about $400 million of capacity, or do we consider a 15 mil property tax, of which 12.5 mils would be for ad valorem bond capacity, generating about $600 million worth of needs for the district? We're overlaying on top of the 12.5 mils, 2 mils recommended for maintenance and a half mil for technology, bringing us back to 15 mils, which is exactly the tax that slipped off of the rolls back in the early 1980s. And so we haven't polled anybody officially. I think we all know the benefits and the disadvantage of sales versus property taxes. This is a weighty decision for the board to make tonight and for the board to make again on Wednesday.
Dr. Aguilar, could you speak, please, on where Lafayette stands as far as the amount of millage we pay towards education as compared to other cities or parishes of a comparable size?
Yes, ma'am. So we looked at our state ranking and per pupil funding. In fact, you've got a handout in your packet this evening. Currently, Lafayette ranks 66th out of 69 school districts in Louisiana in per pupil funding. We fall in the bottom 20% of school districts in per pupil funding. The second page in that handout shows that if you authorize the 15 mils of property taxes, it moves the Lafayette per pupil funding to the middle of the pack in terms of per pupil funding in the state. So we're not going to be in the top 20% or the top 40%. We'll be right in the middle of the median for school districts in Louisiana.
Thank you. Mr. Hidalgo?
Dr. Aguilar, can you speak to the difference in MFP funding if we do in fact call an election, it's successful, and it's a sales tax versus a property tax?
So Mr. Guidry's probably better able to answer that question.
Yes, the MFP calculation is such that it takes a look at a school district's local revenue basis, both in the areas of sales tax and property tax. So this answer is going to apply to both, whichever way the board would decide to go. But ultimately, one of the reasons that our total state and local per pupil amount is so low is our tax bases, both for sales tax and property taxes, are relatively high. So the MFP calculation assumes that we have the capacity to fund at a certain level. And so the state portion of that funding is based on that. So in the calculation, when the state's trying to determine what our fair share, so to speak, of the state funding should be, they take a look at what our capacity to is locally. And so ultimately, our large tax basis is what brings us down in the overall per pupil amount, because the state formula assumes that we should be doing more at the local level. With regards to how it would impact the state funding, it would not result in an increase in state funding. What it would do is recognize or complement the way that formula works. And what I mean by that is the state's assuming in the state level of funding that we have the capacity to generate funds, so it reduces the state funding that we get. And if we do not basically measure up or meet that capacity, then that's how we'll end up, 66 out of 69. If we do meet that capacity that's assumed in the formula, then the local revenues that are generated by that tax, in essence, complements the formula and says we are meeting that capacity. And so we would receive the benefit of the local revenues, but it would not impact the state funding, because the state funding is assuming that we're doing that to begin anyway. It's our responsibility to do it. Whether we do it or not, it's not going to affect our state funding. So if we do it, if we were successful, our state funding would not increase, nor decrease.
Mr. Lashley?
I guess to kind of speak on Mr. Broussard's question, not having many of my constituents or any of my constituents definitely here tonight, the conversations we've had in District 5 has centered around sales tax. I have been asked to support a sales tax. I guess the thinking on that is with the sales tax, everyone pays. And I guess we got a lot of big property owners in District 5, and I guess they feel it's more of a burden, tax burden on them to pay more and more property tax, that they'd prefer a sales tax. There were not really formal conversations, but just going around the community and talking with some of our community leaders and people that really follow things, that they would prefer a sales tax. That's what I'm inclined to support. I guess, Mr. Guidry, would there be a possibility of a partial sales tax, partial property tax on the ballot, or does it need to be one or the other?
I think if we had both, chances are that would probably require two
Okay.
propositions on the ballot.
Okay.
With the word limitation, I don't think we'd be able to do them both justice.
Okay. Okay. So it would have to be one or the other.
Correct.
And I would be more inclined to support a sales tax. I know it generates a little less money over time.
And I'm not trying to sway the board one way or another. Just one of the things that we've covered, and this may have preceded this board, but when you're looking at property taxes, you have a lot of national companies that basically make up about 33% of our property taxes, and these companies are from out of state, and so ultimately, if Company A is paying the 33.56 mills that we currently assess here in Lafayette, and that same company has a location in St. Tammany Parish, where they'd be paying double that amount at a minimum to the school system, at least the school system share. If you look at the cost of the products, they're not double. So the point that I'm making is when the millage, and it's not to say that I'm against big business, but it's to make a point with regards to a good bit of those property taxes are not being paid, in essence, by those large national corporations because of the low millage rates. So in essence, what happens there is the difference falls to the bottom line for that corporation. So one of the things I'd ask you all to consider, and it's not a matter of penalizing big business, it's a matter of everybody just paying their fair share. When you have that large of a percentage being represented by that group or that type of entity, I think there should be some, consideration should be given to some equity for the reason I just mentioned. The bottom line is that the differential in the millage rate basically, for the most part, falls to their bottom line, and the shareholders reap the benefit, not the citizens of the community in which those businesses are served. So I just want to make mention of that. It's not a for or against sales tax as much as that's something that we had shared previously that some folks weren't aware of.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Latchley, and I'll give you my reasoning for proposing this, because I'm certainly sympathetic, and it's a strong argument that I think the number you're looking for is something like 75 or 80% of our sales tax collections come from outside the parish. Acadiana Mall, Louisiana Avenue, places like that. And it's an enticing proposition to build your schools, your parish's infrastructure on people who aren't going to be taking advantage of it. But I'll say this. We can look at our budget, we can look at the state of Louisiana's budget, we can look at the city parish government's budget, and we can see the effect of relying on sales taxes to fund ongoing operations of your governmental entity. And the bottom line is, not only do sales taxes have a cyclical nature to them, where they're way up in the good times and they're way down in the bad times, but they also don't grow proportionally to your population, especially when 75% of the sales taxes are collected from outside the parish. So when we have people moving into Lafayette Parish, and I believe in 2030 we're projected to have close to 300,000 people, our sales tax collections are not going to grow as fast as they would property tax collections, because when they turn a cane field in Milton into a subdivision with 200 homes, those people, the majority of them, are probably already living here. Even if they weren't, we're still deriving 80% of our sales taxes from outside the parish. But we also have to educate those children. So the increase in property taxes that we collect from that subdivision being built doesn't come anywhere close to paying for an elementary school for all those children to attend. Now, I firmly philosophically believe that infrastructure for government, right? Roads, drainage, schools, things of this nature, things that make your property more valuable, things that make people want to buy your home or buy your land and turn it into a subdivision. So those are the things that we should be taxing the property for, because if we build a new elementary school somewhere in District 5, I'm not going to be able to, I know I'll never convince the farmer. I know that. But if we build a new elementary school in District 5 somewhere, somebody might want to turn his farmland into a subdivision. He'll be able to sell it for a whole lot more then than he will now. And this is how you continually build your economy and encourage people to move to your parish and provide the necessary services so that their homes don't flood, their children get educated, and their cars don't break down on the way to work. That's my philosophy. Like I said, we can look at our budget, LCG's budget, the state of Louisiana budget, and it's all relying on sales tax revenue. We're now one of the highest sales tax states, parishes in the country. At some point, we need to switch to stable revenue so that we know the services we're providing and we know how we're going to pay for it going forward. That was my logic behind proposing the property tax. Sure thing.
Mr. Broussard?
When I asked the question earlier if a study was done on property tax versus sales tax, I wasn't swaying one way or the other, but I was part of the team with the feasibility study that was done in when they were quite 5, 6, 7 years ago, and trying to find a sales pitch for it. The sales pitch you gave a minute ago, Mr. Santana, sounds good, and it's a selling point for those who can hear it. But are we prepared to go forward to present that conversation to the public, and the many reasons why you just mentioned a property tax is better for our community, both education-wise, infrastructure-wise, and the whole 9 yards? Are we prepared in the next 60 to 90 days or 60 days to sell that to the public with everything we need on this many sheets of paper you have given us, to let them know that their school, whatever subdivision they live in, is missing no less than $50,000-$60,000 to be complete at tomorrow's need. Can we go forward in the 60 days to educate the public the importance of passing and supporting a property tax for the Lafayette Parish education? That's my concern. We can't go out there and put this on a ballot and fail if we don't let the public know the importance of the education that we want to put forward for our children versus the dollar that they might have to give up to do that. That was my question. That's my concern.
Well, Mr. Broussard, I would offer yes, that if we don't do it, who will? If we're not prepared to go out there and fight for our school facilities, who will? I think one of the differences that we have today is that we have groups that maybe were traditionally opposed to each other are in support of this initiative. We received a letter from the One Acadiana President and CEO, Mr. Jason Alcubi, where, and I'm just going to read a few parts of it. Through a series of meetings over the past 6 months that involved a team of key One Acadiana leaders and LPSS leaders, our discussions on a school facilities initiative have emphasized the following, and it goes through several different principles. What I want to skip down to, since the discussion is about sales tax versus property tax, is he indicates 1A leaders indicate, the One Acadiana leaders indicate a preference for a proposal to be structured as a property tax instead of a sales tax, and here are a few reasons. The first reason, the revenues on a property tax, as Mr. Santani said, are more stable than a sales tax and will yield a lower interest rate if bonded out. The second point they make is a sales tax is one of the most regressive taxes, and Louisiana already has the highest sales tax rate in the country. So we're already at the highest in the country. With a half-cent increase, Youngsville residents would pay 11% in sales tax, and part of Carencro would pay 11.5%. Lafayette's property tax rate, on the other hand, is the lowest among Louisiana cities and would remain the lowest even with an increase, this increase being considered. So here we are debating whether we want to increase something that is already one of the highest in the country versus whether we want to increase it's one of the lowest in our state. And the third point is most of Lafayette Parish public schools were built on a property tax of 15.5 mils, which was allowed to expire. A property tax proposal would, in essence, allow or ask the voters to restore the pre-existing millage. Now, this isn't, a poll of the general public, but it is good input from the leading business group within Acadiana.
May I interrupt for 1 second
Yes,
and
sir.
point out that it is a statement from the group of people in Lafayette Parish who pay the majority of property taxes.
You are correct. And this is also the group of people that we really need to rally behind us and support us and encourage their employees to go out and then support us. So that's the, I have more information, but I'll bring it up later. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions from the board? All right. I'm going to make one last call for members of the public to make any comments, have any questions, state any preferences. Ms. Sonia?
Thank you, Madam President. I'm Pat Sonier, and I'm just speaking for myself and a lot of people that I've spoken to in the community. I'm in support of the sales tax because everybody pays the sales tax. And driving down the Interstate I-49 going south toward Broussard, you see the number of businesses that have closed because, and they're all service companies, this type of thing. They're leaving Lafayette. Lake Charles is building up, and so some of these people are moving there, but they've just moved out of the parish. So we're losing that, and a lot of people in Lafayette have a problem. When they built that new shopping center at the corner of Cully Saloon and Ambassador Caffrey, and they exempt those people from property tax, and you did not do it, it's another organization that did. People were upset because that is property tax that this school system needed to build the schools, and they're not going to pay it for, I think, 10 years, which is not a good idea. But then you're going to ask the people that are living in Lafayette and haven't built something and haven't gotten that exemption to pay that property tax. And recently, people just paid their property tax. I have some friends that they doubled the property tax they had to pay. They are not happy campers. And there are a lot of people in Lafayette, in the small towns, that this happened to. But they would support a sales tax because everybody pays a sales tax. And I will tell you, I shopped for Christmas, and I love shopping. That's like a hobby. But we had people, I was running into people from Lake Charles, Alexandria, that came here to shop because we have better shopping facilities, we have better commodities here. So you have to think about there's a lot of money coming in with this. And what I want is I want the tax to be successful, and I think a sales tax would be absolutely successful. You will have a lot of questions about property taxes. So think about that. You want the one that's going to sell and sell to everybody, not just to a few people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saunier. Ms. Espinoza?
Kathleen Espinoza. I just have a quick question maybe about the language of the two propositions that you're considering. When it's written or when it's on the ballot, is it fair to say it's a dedicated tax at this point? I'm not sure who to address that question to, but I think that the language of the proposition itself is important, certainly. I'm sure you're aware of that. But the idea of a dedicated tax, I think, might be more appealing to a...
Yeah, and we'll discuss this once we get past this motion. The language, the proposed language for the proposition will reference a specific resolution, which we'll discuss today, and that resolution will list the jobs, the projects by priority, and we'll give a very detailed or dedicated listing.
Right.
So.
Okay. All right, that's it.
I would say that I don't think any of us would ever dream of proposing anything that wasn't dedicated.
Ms. Burris?
Hi, I'm Ann Burris. I just thinking about property tax versus sales tax. It just hits me that some of our communities will be paying almost 11% or up to 11% sales tax, and people who come in and shop in those areas as well, whereas we're at the bottom on property taxes now. So, I mean, I'm a property owner, and I really care about my schools. I think all property owners do, even the large commercial property owners, even these large corporations that might have headquarters throughout the state and pay larger, higher property taxes in St. Tammany Parish. I think they really care about their employees, schools, and all that too. So, I mean, property owners kind of need to kick in more if we're paying the lowest rate. That's sort of just my feeling right now, but I'm interested in the conversation. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Mr. Santani?
This will be the last thing, I hope. I feel that everybody does pay property taxes. If you live in Lafayette Parish, it doesn't really make any difference where you live, whether you rent or own, you do pay property taxes. Because I would be willing to bet that if an apartment's property tax increased by $100 a year, that the rent is going to increase by $100 a year. I don't know any landlords that are so nice that they're going to pay the property taxes for me. They might collect it and pay it, but that would be my argument, that everyone in the parish does pay the property taxes. I've got no answer for the people who come from Lake Charles to shop here. Got no answer for that one.
All right, if there's no further questions or comments, then Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Six for, 2 against.
All All right, so thank you. With the passage of that motion, we will now take all discussion of this proposed sales tax off of the table, and all further discussions of the remaining items for tonight will focus on the language for the tax proposition, the resolution, and the listing of projects with an eye to property tax only. All right, the next matter on our agenda is proposed resolution number 01-17-1896, projects listing for possible call for election for sales tax or property tax and appointment of oversight committee. Dr. Aguilar.
Members of the board, you have a copy of what's called the executive summary in your packet of information. The Lafayette Parish School System, specifically my office along with Mr. Guidry, we are asking for your approval to secure $623 million worth of general obligation bonds to be repaid via a 12.5 mil property tax. In order to try to disseminate the money fairly across the district, we looked at dividing the parish into the high school feeder zones, and we looked specifically at the number of portable classrooms within each high school feeder zone and the percent of portable buildings within each high school zone. So what we decided to do was essentially budget monies for each high school zone based on the number of temporary classrooms in that high school zone. For example, the Acadiana High School zone has 104 temporary classrooms, representing about 25% of our inventory of temporary buildings. So we allocated to the high school zone 25% of the available funds. So we're proposing that the high school zone would receive $115 million worth of bond capacity. Karen Crowe High, that high school zone, has only 36 temporary classrooms, representing 8% of our inventory. The Karen Crowe High zone would be budgeted $58 million of bonding capacity. Lafayette High has 124 temporary classrooms, representing 29% of our inventory. They would receive $195 million worth of bonding capacity. Northside has 71 temporary classrooms, 17% of our inventory. Their allocation would be $83 million. The Como Southside zone has 81 temporary classrooms. They would receive 19% of the bonding capacity, roughly $128 million. The special schools, that encompasses J. Wallace James and David Thibodeau STEM, they have 2% of our temporary buildings. They would receive $37 million. Now let me explain to you that in the Lafayette High Zone, aside from the funding allocation because of the number of temporary buildings, we added an additional $35 million of funds earmarked for Phase 2 for Lafayette High rehabilitation efforts. We also needed to finish Phase 2 of Southside High School, and so we likewise budgeted $35 million additional dollars in the Southside Como zone. And in the special schools category, we budgeted $30 million of bond capacity for a future school that would be built if the need exists down the road for the district. So we budgeted $30 million for a yet to be determined additional school needed by the district. And the last thing we did was we budgeted slightly less than 1% of the bond capacity to allow the district to ramp up the program management department so that we can make these facility improvements. So based on the allocation of funds by the high school feeder zone, we studied the needs of each individual school, and so I want you to pull out two 11 by 17 inch pages that you have at your desk. And what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through what we are proposing. So when you find those 11 by 17 inch pages, take a look at bond sale number 1. Bond sale number 1 would be $149 million worth of bonds that would be sold in the first bond sale. And the goal of bond sale number 1 would be to eliminate 95 temporary classrooms in the district. So, for example, Lafayette High is first on the list. Its phase 1 would encompass building approximately 34 permanent classrooms on the Lafayette High campus to eliminate the temporary buildings. We're actually proposing for most of our high schools the creation of what would be a freshman academy, a new construction facility that likely could accommodate all of the ninth graders in a new building to help with core instruction. The price tag on phase 1 for Lafayette High School is budgeted at $44,990,000. That would occur in the first bond sale. Evangeline Elementary is second on the list. They have 32 temporary classrooms. We're proposing to construct 32 permanent classrooms. We're proposing to upgrade bathrooms, site improvements, building envelope improvements, food service improvements, HVAC, electrical, and ADA upgrades, along with some safety improvements for that school. In fact, every school is going to be touched by safety improvements to each campus. We would budget $29,826,000 for Evangeline Elementary. Prairie Elementary is next on the list. We would budget $35 million. In the case of Prairie Elementary, we're proposing the likelihood of abandoning the current campus and looking for new property to build a new school. The CSRS study in 2010 found the site problematic for more permanent construction. The next part of the first bond sale would be phase 2 for Southside High School, $35 million. We would also complete phase 2 of BO Elementary School, $4 million budgeted to complete phase 2 of BO Elementary School. All told, phase 1, bond sale number 1, would be $149 million. If you look at the second bond sale, Broadmoor Elementary would get permanent classrooms, would get improvements to the campus, would get safety improvements, budgeted at almost $32 million. Alice Boucher would be next on the list. They would get 24 permanent classrooms. Budget for Boucher is $29.5 million. Lafayette High gets phase 2. We're proposing $35 million additional dollars for Lafayette High School. In effect, for Lafayette High, the $45 million in bond sale 1 and the $35 million in bond sale 2 gives Lafayette High $80 million. The architects tell me that that will give Lafayette High a facelift. And we will be able to stay on that campus for the next 40 to 50 years. Next on the list is Woodvale Elementary School. They would receive 20 permanent classrooms. Price tag is $22 million. And last on that list, bond sale number 2 is Karen Crow Heights, $31 million budgeted. Bond sale 3 follows the same logic. Plantation gets $26 million. Ridge Elementary gets $20 million. LJ Alamon gets the remainder of their rehabilitation, $39 million. Charles Burke, Live Oak, Lafayette Middle, GT Linden, Milton, and Youngsville. Those 6 campuses have adequate facilities today. They would each receive $500,000 for safety improvements. Next on the list is Acadian Middle, gets $5.3 million, and Edgar Martin, $6 million. So bond sale 1 eliminates 95 temporary buildings. Bond sale 2 eliminates 83 temporary buildings. Bond sale 3 eliminates 84 temporary classrooms. Yes, Annette reminded me, in reference to Karen Crow Heights, we're thinking that money would be for a new facility for Karen Crow Heights. Bond sale 4 eliminates 74 temporary classrooms. You'll see many of our traditional high schools listed in bond sale number 4. Como High gets 30 permanent classrooms, likely a freshman wing. Their budget is $39 million. Acadiana High gets 22 plus permanent classrooms. Their budget is $30 million. Karen Crow High gets an additional building on their campus with $15 million budgeted. Northside High gets $8 million. Paulboro gets $5 million. Broussard Middle, $8.7. J.W. Falk gets another $5.4 million. And S.J. Montgomery gets $9.6 million. So bond sale 4 is $121 million. And the last bond sale is $100 million, eliminating 88 temporary classrooms. Elio Judy's gets $7 million. Catherine Drexel, the improvements to the existing Catherine Drexel, $9 million. West Side gets an additional $5 million. Incredibly, after we rebuild it, because of the flooding, we'll still have temporary buildings. FEMA's not going to replace temporary buildings. Austin gets $5.5 million. Myrtle is budgeted $5.7 million. Scott Middle, $5.8. Doosan, $7 million. Ernest Gallette, $4 million. Karen Crow Middle, $5 million. Judy's Middle, almost $3. J. Wallace James, $5. David Thibodeau gets $2 million for baseball, softball, soccer, and track facilities, and then $30 million for a new school. That represents a plan to eliminate 100% of the temporary classrooms on our schools today. So Mr. Guidry has this project listing in the resolution we would like you guys to consider tonight and again tomorrow night, on Wednesday night. So Billy, would you go over the resolution?
Yeah, we have a couple questions before we go there. So is it fair to say, Dr. Aguilar, that the listing that you just went over with us was based on close reference to the master facility plan that was prepared several years ago?
Absolutely. I want to make sure you understand all of the comments listed in the description for the school is based on what we found in the 2010 long-range facility plan for the district. When the CSRS plan said the facility needed to be abandoned, then we're following that recommendation. If CSRS felt like the facility could be rehabilitated, we're referencing that also.
Mr. Santani?
Dr. Aguilar, could you, or I guess Mr. Bordelon might know this, review kind of the construction timeline for each phase? Like how long did we anticipate the Lafayette High, Evangeline, Prairie, Southside, and BO Elementary phase to take? How long do we expect the proceeds from, or the construction from the proceeds of bond sale 2?
So, Mr. Santani, was told by Mr. Guidry that once we sell the bonds, we have 3 years to complete construction.
Do we anticipate using all 3 for these projects? I would imagine, right? Maybe not.
I think it's going to depend on how quickly we retain architects and we develop building plans. I don't think we want to push construction. Mr. Bordelon, would you say construction 30 months in some cases?
Good evening, members of the board. Kyle Bordelon, Director of Planning and Facilities. We will certainly push these projects as fast as we can. Of course, with renovations, you know, we have to work around the school schedule, the students, and all of that kind of thing. So we are going to have some challenges that we'll have to work through, but feel certain that these projects, once we get them started, we'll be able to finish them within the 3-year period of time. So 24 to 30 months is probably a good estimate at this point.
Mr. Lashley?
I guess one of the first questions I'd get, according to your timeline here, with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the majority of the projects in District 5 fall in Phase 5. We're looking 9 to 12 years from now before those projects are started, before those bonds are sold. Would we sell them every 3 years, or? I mean, if you sold Phase 1, let's say in 2018, selling Phase 2 would come when? Selling Phase 3, I mean, is there a schedule as to how they'd be sold, when they'd be sold?
It would probably be every other year.
Okay. So in 8 to 10 years, we would have all of these projects started.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Knezik?
Dr. Aguilar, is there a rough price per square foot that you use for all these metrics on projects? Or was it not that simple?
It's not that simple. We started with the budget for each high school zone and looked at the dollars estimated by CSRS in 2010 and tried to make sure, one, that every school received some safety improvements, which they will, and trying to match the budget with the number of temporary classrooms on that campus. I want to make sure you understand, and the commitment from my office is that we are going to try to use the most effective construction method to build these facilities. I'd really like us to be able to accomplish what we are set out to do without spending $600+ million worth of public monies. We're giving you what we think is a good best guess estimate for each of those projects.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Dr. Aguilar, did you all use only the master plan to identify the priority projects? I see that, you know, we've got some in it's not district by district, which is good. However, as Mr. Lachele said, there are several in bond sale 5, they're in his district. Did you only use the master plan to identify, and prioritize this list?
No, sir. We actually looked at the number of temporary buildings as a major priority. So you'll see early on that we're really attacking the campuses that have an unacceptably high number of temporary classrooms. That's why if a campus or a series of campuses might have fewer than 10 temporary classrooms, they're pushed farther back on the bond sale priority list.
Dr. Aguilar, do you know what percentage of the $630 million is allocated to pure security, facility security upgrades?
So, Mr. Knezik, we're budgeting $500,000 each for 6 campuses, so roughly about $500,000 per campus for security. And we're talking about point of entry security upgrades.
So $500K per school is
Yes.
on the list?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Centani?
I certainly agree with attacking the campuses with the temporary classrooms first to try and get those things moved out. I would kind of like to see, though, thinking that security for the children is, especially in this day and age, is no less important. I might be in favor of trying to move the security for all of the campuses into at least phase 2. We could, Mr. Knezik, would you have any objection at moving Woodvale into a later phase with the idea that we would use that number sticks out to me, as he just said, $500,000 per campus for our 42 schools.
I just want to clarify, per campus, or you mentioned something about 6 schools.
The average budget for those 6 schools that did not need any other improvements was about $500,000.
That's how you based the $500,000?
Correct.
And then you applied the $500,000 to every school?
Correct.
Right. So that would basically be the same rationale then if we were to take Woodvale, which sits right at $22 million, and put all of the schools, even the ones that are just getting security upgrades. Because I know just happenstance the other day I received an email from a mother at Myrtle Place. Myrtle Place is guarded by a latch on a chain link fence, and I don't think there's certainly no buzzer on the front door. So I think that might be a worthwhile consideration for us to move the security for all of the campuses into an earlier phase that gets done within the next 3 years or so.
Hey, Mr. Angel?
Yes, ma'am. Are we talking about resolution 01-17-1896?
We haven't started quite yet talking about the particulars of the resolution. We were looking at the priority list, which is incorporated in the resolution, so we're getting there. Dr. Chasson?
Yes, ma'am. Quick question. When it comes to the breakdown of the money, the percentage of the portable buildings, it's what drove the exact numbers? I want to be sure I understood
It
that.
largely drove the calculation, that's correct.
Okay. So if there was a 15% of one particular feeder zone, then that 15% would be 15% of the 616 total number, 616 million? Can anybody answer that?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Dr. Sashaw?
The total is 616 million with 6 million directed for project management. So out of that 616 million, if someone has 10%, if one feeder zone has 10% of the portable buildings, then we allocated 10% of the 616 and then broke that down to whatever schools needed it?
Actually, before making that calculation, those specific schools that got additional allocations that were listed, that would have been backed out first. So let's see, Let me flip back to it.
So, Dr. Chasson, we backed out the $35 million for Phase 2 for Lafayette High, the
Okay.
$35 million for Phase 2 of Southside, and the $6 million for project management. We took that off of the 620.
Off of the 6.
And then we calculated a per zone value.
Okay. So at what point would one zone get more than the other? I'm trying to understand the exact breakdown. I understand we took some money out first because we've got projects that are kind of are even higher on the priority list, but at that point, what determines let's say we took out 100 million, which left us, or let's round it off. Let's say it's 500 million total. At that point, for the 500 million, then we went with the exact percentages?
We did.
Okay. So even if one of those $30 million chunks went into a particular zone, that zone still got the percentage, that wasn't, okay.
It did.
Okay.
All right, members of the public?
Hi, Ella Arsama. Does the construction listed on each bond phase include classrooms for the future student growth? Or does it just take care of the number of student overflow that is being experienced at this time? Question?
I think we understand the question. So the work that's being considered represents the needs today. I'll give you a for example. A team of people from Lafayette traveled to Ascension Parish. They're on a very, very fast new school construction pathway in Ascension Parish. So they are regularly building schools. And so as they open an elementary school, a brand new elementary school in a brand new zone, that school is configured so that they can receive six additional temporary classrooms. When that school gets 6 temporary classrooms, they start making plans to build a new elementary school in the zone. So it's not to say that once we finish this endeavor that there will not be any temporary buildings, but we have to stop what has happened over the past 30 years that got us into the situation we're in. We have to rezone on a regular basis, and this board is committed to doing that, and we have to be prepared. As Mr. Centani mentioned, the population is expected to grow significantly in Lafayette Parish. We have to be ready to open additional elementary schools, maybe a middle school down the road. It may not be this board, could be another board seated here. We got to understand that we may have some temporary buildings, but it's not to say that we're going to have 424 temporary classrooms after we finish this exercise.
Okay, that being said, that's what we're trying to eliminate, the temporary buildings and stuff. Is there any way that when y'all do add on to the schools to take out the old temporary buildings that y'all could build a little bit bigger space now? Or there's just no money for it?
We're actually trying to do just that in our estimates.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Chesson?
Could somebody list for me what the pullout money is, real quickly, by project?
So, Dr. Chasson, those $35 million for Phase 2 Lafayette High, $35 million for Phase 2.
1 second, hold on 1 second, Doc. Phase 2 of Lafayette High?
$35 million.
Okay.
Southside High, $35 million. An additional $11,500,000 for Karen Crowe Heights, plus $6.1 million for project management. So we pulled all that money off of the top from the budget available before dividing based on the rest of the district.
Okay. Before dividing by the portable buildings, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, and one more $30 million for the future new school in down the
Future new
road.
school. Okay, I got you. All right, thanks.
All right, and I just want to remind everyone that in addition to the meeting tonight, there is a joint Finance and Facility Committee meeting tomorrow, which of course will give more opportunity to parse down the priority listing, and because we have to have the resolution pretty ironclad to be ready to be voted on by Wednesday. I want us to move on to the language of the resolution that we're looking at, but I would like to take a 10-minute break before we do that.
These mics are spicy. Four mics and two. Same thing with
I saw you back there, you were looking.
All right, I'd like to ask all the board members to take their seats so we can continue with the meeting. Mr. Guidry, if you'd like to go forward with the discussion on the resolution.
Yes, you want to wait a few minutes, Dawn? Resolution 017-17-1896 basically sets forth the building projects that would tie to a bond sale that we had discussed earlier. And in addition to that, would provide for the appointment for an oversight committee. With regards to the oversight committee, in section 2, that oversight committee is named Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, and basically goes on further to explain that it would be a voluntary 11-member committee whose purpose is to review the timeline and expenditure of bond-generated money for specific bond projects listed in sections 1 and 3 of this resolution. It goes on to describe the membership. Basically, one citizen from each school board district as selected by the board member for that district, citizens from the business community selected by one Acadiana, and a citizen from the Lafayette Parish Public Education Stakeholders Council. These committee members would serve on the committee for 2-year terms, with exception of the initial term where 5 of the members would serve a 2-year term and the other 6 would serve 3-year terms, and then thereafter everyone would serve 2-year terms, so that we wouldn't have all committee members exiting at the same time. The committee would meet biannually to review reports provided by the school system, and then report to the board, and include in that report their comments on the construction, the progress of the construction of each project, and the compliance with the bond project listing. So there's this particular resolution introduces accountability throughout the life of the various maturity periods, because basically this committee would make its first report following the initial 6-month period after the delivery of the first issue, and continue its reporting until all proceeds of the bonds authorized at election have been spent. So that would be for the life of all 5 bond sales. Beyond that, Section 5, we get into the actual project listing by bond sale. And basically, these are the projects that we reviewed earlier. The schedule we reviewed earlier put each bond sale side by side. This one just lists it vertically by bond sale. So ultimately, you would end up seeing the same projects. It's just in a different format. First schedule makes it easier to see all 5 years at one time, but it would have been rather difficult to fit that into the resolution in that format. So you'll see it begins with bond sale 1, which totals $149,142,36. That's the second column, followed by a description of the site and the work that would be done there, followed by a column which presents the estimated costs. I'll just scroll down to bond sale 2, and it continues on through bond sale 5. So you basically have a resolution, being that the propositions are limited to 200 words, it lends itself to having a resolution that ties into that proposition, which provides further detail to better facilitate an understanding of the full intent of the proposition, as well as, in this case, providing accountability to the public via that oversight committee.
Mr. Knezik?
Madam President, I move that we strike Section 2 in its entirety of this resolution, and that we change the word hearing in the third line of Section 3 from hearing to meeting.
A second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Knezik, second by Mr. Santani. All right.
All right. On Section 3, I'll start with that. Section 3 basically provides a provision for the board to change its mind with regards to site location or scope, which I think the board in the future will need that flexibility. I don't believe it needs to be a public hearing. I think they can do it at a meeting, just like this type of a meeting. So I think that should be a fairly simple change. As far as the oversight committee, certainly we want oversight, but when I look around this room, I think that's our job. I mean, I think our job as elected officials is to make sure that the public's money is spent as it's supposed to be. We're putting a lot of effort into developing a resolution dedicated to fixing facilities, and we're going as far as putting those facilities and estimated dollar amounts and a description of the scope in this resolution. I don't believe that this board needs any other oversight committee to tell us whether we are or are not doing our jobs. I believe we have, as an example in this room, representatives from the business community and the community as a whole that have full access to us in a public open meeting, televised, to tell us whether or not we are or are not doing our jobs. And if there is issue with anything that this board or future boards are doing with regards to this resolution and how the tax monies are spent, I think it should be done on this floor, in this room, in a public forum, in an open meeting.
All right, any other questions or comments about the motion on the floor? Okay, any members of the public?
Kathleen Espinoza, and I just want to speak to Mr. Knezik's discussion of the Community Oversight Committee. Should you opt to keep the Community Oversight Committee, I would strongly recommend that you expand the membership a bit. Specifically, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and I know that the League of Women Voters was instrumental back in 2009, 2010 with the Community Schools Coalition. So they're very much engaged in this issue. So I would say that. I think also you may want to consider people that are actually working in the schools to represent, the on-the-ground eyes and ears on a committee like that.
Mr. Santani?
Yeah, I would actually go the other direction and just say, let's not single out any group. And if we do keep this committee, just say each board member appoints a committee member. And it can be from any community organization or otherwise interested citizen who would like to serve on the committee.
Thank you. I'm Natalie Harder, and I'm a board member for One Acadiana. And I would just urge you to consider the Oversight Committee. I believe this board has the foresight to invest in the facilities in the way that our community needs it, but we won't always have the luxury of a set of the same individuals sitting around this room ensuring that what you commit to over the next few weeks will be implemented in the way that you envisioned and the community trusted you to do. So I think that there's a benefit to a layer of transparency. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments about the current motion? Mr. Hidalgo?
Yes. I think I've experienced that quite a bit where, I know I've been told, and I think maybe we as a board have kind of been told what the public wants or doesn't want. I field many calls, emails, text messages, Facebook messages, all hours of the night. So I do feel like I have my finger on the pulse of the community. However, I understand the concept behind having an oversight committee and the perception behind having an oversight committee. And since perception is reality, I did want to ask Mr. Knezik, is there any other, relative to your motion, is there any other opportunity here? Or do you just feel strongly that this is our job, our duty, and we just need to do our job?
Well, if you're asking me, I feel like that's our job. I feel like our job is to, when I say our job, I mean those elected into this position today, 10 years or 20 years from now, it's our job and it's the community's job to hold us accountable. And this is where to do it. I mean, and all of you, those who I recognize your face and you recognize mine, it's because you come here and you hold us accountable and you ask those tough questions. And I do believe that's our role. I think that if we look at the committees that we currently have, we have some that work and we have many that don't work, and many that pass on. What I don't want to do is set up a committee for the sake of setting up a committee to make people feel good, when the reality is sometimes the recommendation that this board gets are from committees. They don't necessarily have all the information, or the board is in a situation where we have to make a decision based off other information. And I can't necessarily forecast like what an example of that might be, but I do believe that strongly that it is our job, and I say again, our job as elected officials on this board to make sure that we're doing the public's work, and that means holding us accountable today and 10 years from now on making sure that however we spend this money, we spend it appropriately. And I can talk about the administrative plan, I can talk about things that 10 years from now, when people are considering this resolution and reading this language in Section 2, they don't necessarily have the benefit of being here today and understanding the circumstances around why we're putting this in today, and may interpret things differently. So I think we can simplify this resolution by keeping it extremely simple. You'll have a Section 1 talking about what it's about, Section 3, which will end up being, if the board has to make a change, they have to have a meeting to make the change. And then, oh, by the way, this is what we say we're going to do, and I think it'll be clear cut. So if you're asking me my opinion, I believe that is our job, is to be held accountable. I think this board here, and the board in the future that it's elected to the seat, is the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee.
All right. I do believe that we need a Citizens Oversight Committee. I do not believe, however, that the language needs to be included in the resolution. The tax proposition language itself will adopt this resolution and everything in it by reference. So it'll be part of the tax if it passes. And I agree that it needs to be simplified. And because the intent is to make this in the nature of a dedicated tax with a precise listing of projects, that's what the resolution should be limited to, and that any development of an oversight committee should be done outside of the four corners of the resolution, either by policy or otherwise.
Madam President, can I?
Ms. Saunier first, please, Mr. Hidalgo. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just here to speak in backing what Eric said. We do not need another committee as an oversight. The board needs to step up, take its responsibility, and take it seriously, and I think you have. We have been caught, and if you think about the Blue Ribbon Committee and the half-cent sales tax, that is the biggest mess that we've gotten into, because they created a committee that decided the tax would be spent on other things rather than strictly teacher salaries. And the teachers have been debating this since it happened, and it's caused a lot of problems. So I think not having it and letting you just decide, period, that takes care of everything. Thank you.
Mr. Hidalgo.
Yes. Could we get the motion read back to us?
Madam Secretary.
That the board strike Section 2 entirely and change the word hearing in Section 3 to meeting.
Any additional, Ms. Arsenal?
Mr. Knesset, while we wait for Ms. Ella to come up, would you consider leaving out the second part of your motion? I have some changes to Section 3 that I wouldn't mind making.
Yes, I would consider that, yes. So if we can limit my motion to striking Section 2 and take out the discussion on Section 3.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Secretary. Come on.
Okay. I think you should leave Section 2 in and widen it so that more people would be able to participate in the meetings and stuff. If you will do away with Section 2, I hope that you will plan on having workshops to educate the public, on issues and things that might be changing. Thank you.
Dr. Shessel?
With the current motion that's coming, it'll be limiting things out of it, but it won't be finalized, correct? We'll still be able to make changes directly after that?
If the motion passes to eliminate Section 2,
Sections.
then it is out of the proposed resolution, but we still have additional time to edit before we vote on the final resolution on Wednesday. Okay, any additional comments, questions from board members or from the public? And Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Eight for, none against.
Mr. Santani?
Madam President, I move that we limit the project list to bond sales 1 and 2 while removing Woodvale Elementary from bond sale 2 and replacing that project with all campus security upgrades.
Mr. Santani, since there is a joint facility and finance committee scheduled tomorrow, can we look at making those particular changes to the project list as part of that joint committee tomorrow?
I'm happy to do so if that means if we'll have the ability to present those changes Wednesday night. Is that what you're
Absolutely.
thinking? Okay, that's fine.
I don't know if Mr. Knesset wants to go back to his proposed edit to Section 3.
Well, that was
Okay.
part of my idea behind limiting that was going to be, I move that we strike the second sentence of Section 3. Starting with upon and the remainder.
So do we have a second?
I'll sit.
Second.
Dr. Shessel? wait for their discussion. Mr. Guidry, I was waiting for your conversation. Is the proposed change acceptable to remove that language from our tax attorney's perspective?
Specifically, what language
Oh,
is
I
he
didn't know if that's what you were discussing. Where it says upon a determination, that entire sentence would be stricken. I thought perhaps your discussion with our tax attorney was on that proposed change.
It's basically the language that's being removed removes flexibility that this board or future boards may need as we progress through some of these construction projects. Just to give you an example, if we list, and this isn't specific to this listing, but if we list that we're going to replace West Side High School, West Side Elementary, and we'll end up having damages because of a storm or whatever, and receive insurance proceeds to do that project, then we in essence those funds can't be utilized for something else. So you really need to have that flexibility, not necessarily to remove a project completely for no reason at all. I mean, I would think if the board is looking to make a change, there's going to be a strong basis in which to make that change. So removing that verbiage would remove the flexibility, the board being able to change it in cases, extreme cases, where they would need to, that change would need to be made.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Shassel?
I just wanted to respond to that. When it comes to the flexibility, I can understand where we would want to have it. However, what I also don't want to see is future boards, future superintendents, or the new wave of direction to take what we're saying as a dedicated tax and here's exactly what we're going to spend the money on and decide otherwise. So that was my only concern with striking that second sentence out, was to just assure us that what we say we're going to spend the money on and what's in the one Acadiana's memo to us actually holds true, which is something that I kind of hold very important. So that was my only reasoning.
I think my concern with removing the language altogether, removing all board flexibility, is the concern that if our taxes are so dedicated by the terms of our resolution, that there is a potential that we'll have dedicated a certain amount of money for a project that will never be done for whatever reason, and we will not have, we as a board, whether it's us or a future board, will not have that opportunity to move that money to another project, because it's ironclad in the resolution that's being made part of the tax proposed resolution proposal itself. And so I think that we need some degree of flexibility, not to just willy-nilly say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this. It's going to still be dedicated. This language here may be a little broad, and we can maybe tighten that up so that in emergent situations, so for instance, a school burns down and we choose not to rebuild it because we've got land someplace else and we're doing something different. So we may just need to tighten up that language somewhat, but still have enough flexibility to deal with those types of unforeseen situations so that we can make the best use of the money and not have our hands tied unreasonably. Mr. Hidalgo.
My opinion is the idea behind the tax proposition is for facilities. And since we see priorities change sometimes, we definitely don't want to be tied down to doing something that at the time, when we get to the time that it needs to be done, we realize that, boy, it's a lot more important for this to happen, especially if we're talking about projects 5, 6, 7 years down the road. And so again, I certainly want this to be dedicated to facilities, but things are sure to change in everybody's district, and we may have to, we've already shown that we've made decisions and we've made changes to some of our projects because priority changed. So that's my concern.
Madam President, I would have to agree with you in an emergency situation. Excuse me, in an emergency situation, yes, but as far as the language of upon determination of the board and scopes of project as necessary, then yes, tightening the language then, because someone that supports this tax because we said it was dedicated and this is exactly what we're going to spend it on, if they supported something that says this was going to be done in phase 3, and then it gets backed up and they're waiting for this to start 6 years from now, and it doesn't get started, then at that point, somebody's going to come back and say, well, you guys didn't spend the money on what you said you were going to spend it on, which has been the case in previous situations. So the current language, no, but tightening it up, yes.
And I just want to make sure I put, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I want to put it in context. What your first part of your statement was when you were making this motion was I think you were going down the path of restricting this initial resolution to bond sales 1 and 2, around $300 million. And I think, and again, I'm not speaking on your behalf, but this is my interpretation, is that if this board were to say, we are going to limit this bond resolution to $300 million, which would be, in theory, the money that this board could bond out and potentially begin the construction on, then this board should be able to look at the list for our final agreed upon bond sales 1 and 2 and say, look, this sentence ends at the proceeds of this bond shall be expended on the projects authorized pursuant to the bond proposition. So we're out of the business of forecasting what may be happening in the next board. And I think again, that's what Mr. Santani's intent was. Now, we asked him to table this first part of his discussion, so I don't think we can speak about one without understanding the context of the intent.
Dr. Shessel?
So I just want to ask a question to you real quick, and I know it's going to go probably with the answer. So based upon cutting it in half, basically, that allows that if priorities do change, that it'll be time for the second set anyway, so we can list those priorities then at that time. Is that, okay, I understand.
So that was
Okay.
part of the idea.
I agree with you. Okay.
Was not, I don't want to lock us in 10 years from now to building, I don't know what's on the last page, renovating David Thibodeau's STEM Academy for $2 million. I don't want to lock us in to doing that. What I would rather us do is decide, and bond sale 2 was not quite arbitrary cutoff, but bond sale 2 was, these are the list of projects that I think we can reasonably expect over the next 3 years to not change in priority. So let's just go ahead and ask for that and be done. Tie our hands. And if priority changes, or we decide that something that was in phase bond sale 4 now needs to be in bond sale 3, well then whatever board is here, whichever one of us is here 4 years from now can ask the voters, and we can craft the same or a different resolution at that time. However, that said, I am open to including language that says under no circumstances is this to be spent on anything but facilities or something along those lines. But I think Dr. Chaplin does bring up a good point about if somebody votes for this because they see X project in Y bond sale, well, they're going to expect to have that project built.
The only thing I'm looking at is in my district, or mine and Miss Morrison's, if you look at the Acadiana High School zone, the lion's share of those projects are in bond sales 3 and 5. I need to ask the people of District 5 to support us, but if phase 3, 4, and 5 is not outlined.
I get what you're saying. I do. And I mean, I would point to the fact that Prairie Elementary at $35 million is in phase one.
Is one, right,
Phase one.
right.
I'd hate for this to, kind of descend into what am I getting and what are you getting? And that's easy for me to say because
Right.
I know Lafayette High's right there at the top. I know.
Right.
It's easy for me to say. I do think we run the real risk of asking for $600+ million of giving everybody sticker shock, such that nobody ever even gets to the point of what's in the project list. Right? They're not even going to consider it. They're going to say, oh, $600 million, as opposed to 300. Like, all right, well, let's see what they got. I don't know.
I would say that I think we have to be careful to not fall into the mindset that we have 9 districts and that we need to make sure that there are projects getting done in all 9 districts in the first 2 bond sales, because what we really need to be looking at is parish-wide and what our list of priorities are parish-wide based on that master facility plan. I understand the issues with going to a particular district and asking voters there, but I hope that through education we'll be able to explain that we are a board for the entire parish and we are looking at the good for the entire parish, and that's what we are trying to accomplish. We're trying to improve our facilities parish-wide. I think that the plan, while I'm sure there are some areas that need to be tweaked, breaking it down in a very subjective matter by high school zones, and that's just one of many ways to do it, and then looking at the number of temporary buildings. It's a very objective way to look at this, combined with a view of the master facility plan. And I think it lays out a very well-defined roadmap for where this parish needs to go over the next 10 years. Ms. Arsenal?
Ms. Morris, if you allow me the privilege real quick while she's
Sure.
coming up. It isn't to come off as sounding selfish, because as we've embarked upon this journey, this particular board, everyone's been supportive of wherever the need is. But at the same time, at looking at the good for the entire parish and being supportive, it's almost reaching a point in some districts where they're asking us to stop looking and cover our eyes. So at the same time, we also have to keep in mind what's going on in my district and your district as far as what are they bringing to a particular site or a particular area. And it's easier to ask them to support something when we can tell them that this is going to get done immediately or within 3 years,
Right.
as opposed to not being in phase 1 or phase 2 for a particular district.
Right.
Okay. In the resolution, can you define necessary extreme cases that you would change from the plan that was voted on or would be voted on by the public if this property tax is passed? And also, listening to this conversation, I'm having flashbacks from past board meetings. I want to make sure that all board members are on the same page and that y'all are all comfortable with the plan and the bond plan, phase 1, 2, 5, with everything before this goes up for vote by the public. Because what the public faced with the last board and boards in the past and stuff was hell. And I don't want to see that. It's time to start progressing, moving forward for education for all children. So before y'all vote on anything and put it to the public for a vote, please make sure that y'all are all comfortable with it, because just listening to what Dr. Chasson said, you know, my district, your district, it's about the parish. It's about the priority of needs and stuff, and please get it right.
Well, I would just offer that that's what you're, this is kind of like being at the family dinner table. We're all a family and we're here working out our issues. I mean, this is our only opportunity to work together and to hear priorities of different districts. And this is actually our first opportunity as a board, not just as committees, to look at the priority list. And so I think you're kind of at the window looking inside of our family, and we're not squabbling at all. We're just making sure that we're forcibly heard sometimes to make sure that everybody understands our priorities.
Mr. Broussard.
I think the question is always, it's not who's first, but who's next. And I think that's what some of us sort of afraid of. Once we get rolling and we see a need, more of a need someplace else, like Mr. Latchley said, they're further down the line and we push somebody up and anger someone else. And I know we don't have any ill intent toward any district or any school, but you know, we always, when it's my turn, I understand the need of the growth in the movement, but you know, am I last all the time? Am I next? Why is he first? That's the question that's going to be asked if we do not secure the language that we need to tonight, whatever that language may be.
Dr. Aguilar, I would suggest perhaps that you get with your administrative staff and our general counsel to see if you can come up with some tighter language on Section 3 that still affords this board and future boards some flexibility, but still keeps in mind the intent of this being a dedicated tax for facilities and particular projects.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible for us to not list the dollar amounts? Would this give us the flexibility and just like list the projects themselves and say, okay, we're gonna do these 5 things and it's gonna cost $150 million and we've budgeted for it, but
I have an answer.
Mr.
Sorry.
Knezik?
I was going to say, I have an answer.
Okay.
But if the way that section reads right now, it talks about site location and scope. So site location and scope are exactly that, the location and the scope. The scope is a verbal description of the project. The dollar amount is an estimated dollar amount and is not discussed in section 3. So we could tailor the site the verbiage of the site location and scope. And in construction projects, a change in scope is kind of broad and subjective. Like, well, is this a change of scope, or should you have already understood this? And you can get anyway. I think that if we did ask staff to tighten that up, it might be a good idea.
I'm driving for something better than this, but I'm not just dead set on what I proposed. So something in between I'm amenable to.
You have the motion on the floor. Would you amend your motion to send it to the staff to tighten up?
Absolutely.
Or do we need a motion for that, or can we just ask them to do that to bring back for the joint committee meeting tomorrow?
I'd probably just do that too.
So would you withdraw
I'll withdraw
your
my
motion?
motion. That's fine.
All right. Since we are approaching 8 o'clock, I would entertain at this time a motion to adjourn, and for our communications on these issues to continue at the committee meetings tomorrow and Wednesday at the regular meeting.
I'll make that motion. Are you going to adjourn? I'll make the motion.
Second.
Do we adjourn?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, everybody have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.